The world of Krylos was not kind to humans. It never had been. The planet's red skies stretched endlessly above barren landscapes, where jagged mountains loomed over fields of ash and rock. In this harsh environment, humanity had been reduced to little more than slaves, forced to work under the cruel rule of the Vorthika race of towering insectoid creatures with exoskeletons that gleamed like polished steel under the dim sunlight. The Vorthik were terrifying to look at. Their elongated limbs ended in sharp claws, and their heads resembled armored helmets with glowing green eyes that pierced through the darkness. They spoke in low, guttural tones, their language a series of clicks and hisses that sent shivers down the spines of anyone who heard it. But what made them truly monstrous was not how they looked or sounded, it was how they ruled. For centuries, the Vorthok had dominated the human population on Krylos with an iron fist. Using fear as their primary weapon, Ethan Cole knew this all too well. Every morning, he woke up in the cramped quarters assigned to him and his wife Claire, dreading the sound of the horn that signaled the start of another grueling day in the mines. The air inside their small room was stale, filled with the faint scent of sweat and exhaustion. Ethan would sit on the edge of the bed for a moment, staring at the cracked wall as if willing it to crumble and take him away from this nightmare. But it never did. Instead, he would rise, pull on his worn-out boots, and step outside, ready to face whatever horrors awaited him. Claire always followed close behind. She was smaller than Ethan, with tired eyes and hands calloused from years of hard labor. Despite everything, she still carried a quiet strength within her, a resilience that kept her going, even when the weight of their reality threatened to crush her. Together, they walked to the mines, joining hundreds of other humans who trudged along in silence, their faces etched with despair. The mines themselves were a labyrinth of tunnels carved deep into the earth. The walls glistened with veins of rare minerals that glowed faintly in the dim light. These minerals were the reason the Vorthok had come to Krylos in the first place. They were valuable beyond measure, capable of powering advanced technology far beyond anything humans could create. And so, the Vorthok enslaved the human population, forcing them to extract these treasures while offering nothing in return but cruelty and suffering. Every day in the mines was the same. The humans worked tirelessly, digging and hauling heavy loads under the watchful eyes of the Vorthok overseers. The overseers patrolled the tunnels, their claws clicking against the rocky ground as they barked orders and delivered punishments without mercy. A single mistake, dropping a tool, slowing down for even a second, was enough to earn a beating, or worse.
Ow.
Many didn't survive long in the mines. Those who did often wished they hadn't. But today was different. Today, something happened that would change everything. It started with a boy named Liam. He was only 6 years old, with messy brown hair and wide, curious eyes that seemed out of place in such a bleak world. His mother had died months ago, leaving him alone in the care of the mining community. No one knew exactly how he survived as long as he did. Perhaps it was sheer luck, or maybe it was the kindness of strangers who shared their meager rations. With him, whatever the case, Liam had become a familiar face in the camps, darting between tents and scavenging for scraps of food whenever he could. On this particular morning, Liam wandered closer to the Vorthok supply depot than he should have. The depot was a heavily guarded area where the aliens stored their equipment and provisions. It was strictly off-limits to humans, but hunger had driven Liam to desperation. He slipped past the guards unnoticed, his small frame allowing him to squeeze through gaps that adults couldn't reach. Once inside, he found a crate of nutrient bars, precious food that the Vorthok rarely shared with their slaves. Without hesitation, he grabbed as many as he could carry and bolted back toward the safety of the camps. Unfortunately, he didn't make it far. One of the Vorthok guards spotted him just as he reached the edge of the depot. With a screech of rage, the creature lunged forward, its claws slicing through the air. Liam froze, his tiny body trembling as the guard closed in. Within moments, he was dragged back to the center of the camp, where Zorvak, the leader of the Vorthok, waited. Zorvak was larger than most of his kind, standing nearly 10 feet tall, with an exoskeleton that shimmered like black obsidian. His presence commanded fear, and he reveled in it. When Liam was brought before him, Zorvak stared down at the boy with cold indifference, Round them the humans gathered, their faces pale with dread. Everyone knew what was coming next. "Stealing is a crime," Zorvak growled, his voice reverberating. "Like thunder, you will be punished," Liam whimpered, tears streaming down his dirt-streaked cheeks. "I'm sorry," he stammered. "I was hungry." Zorvak didn't care. With a swift motion, he raised one of his massive claws and brought it down upon the boy. There was no hesitation, no mercy. Just the sickening crunch of bone and the horrified gasps of the crowd. Liam fell to the ground, lifeless, as blood pooled beneath him. For a moment, there was complete silence. Then chaos erupted. Some people screamed, others sobbed, and a few turned away, unable to bear the sight. Ethan stood frozen, his heart pounding in his chest as he watched the scene unfold. Claire clutched his arm tightly, her nails digging into his skin, but he barely noticed. All he could see was Liam's broken body lying in the dirt. A stark reminder of the Vorthok's brutality that night. As Ethan lay awake in their quarters, the image of the boy haunted him. He replayed the moment over and over again in his mind, unable to shake the feeling of helplessness that consumed him. Claire tried to comfort him, whispering softly in the dark. But her words offered little solace. "We can't fight them, Ethan," she said. "We're outnumbered, outgunned. If we try to resist, they'll kill us all." "I know," Ethan replied, his voice hollow. "But I can't keep living like this. Not after what I saw today." Claire sighed, knowing there was no changing. His mind, once it was made up, she had seen that determined look in his eyes before, and it scared her. Still, she couldn't blame him for wanting to do anything to fight back against the monsters who had taken so much from them. As the days passed, Ethan found himself unable to focus on anything else. The memory of Liam's death gnawed at him constantly, fueling a growing anger that burned hotter with each passing moment. He began talking to other miners, sharing his thoughts and gauging their reactions. To his surprise, many felt the same way he did. They were tired of living in fear, tired of being treated like animals. Slowly but surely, a spark of rebellion began to form. One evening, after finishing their shift in the mines, Ethan approached Marcusa, former soldier who had been captured during Earth's initial colonization attempt on Krylos. Marcus was a big man with broad shoulders and a scar running down the side of his face. He had spent years enduring the Vorthok's cruelty, and his hatred for them ran deep. "What are you planning?" Marcus asked, when Ethan pulled him aside. "I'm thinking about fighting back," Ethan admitted. "Not just for us, but for Liam, for everyone they've hurt." Marcus studied him for a long moment, before nodding. "Count me in," he said simply. With Marcus on board, Ethan felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in years. Together, they began recruiting others who shared their desire for vengeance. Among them was Rachel, a medic who had lost her family. To the Vorthok's brutality, her calm demeanor masked a fierce determination, and she quickly became an invaluable member of the group. As the resistance grew, so did Ethan's resolve. He knew the road ahead would be dangerous, possibly even suicidal, but he also knew they couldn't continue living under the Vorthok's tyranny. Something had to change. He was willing to risk everything to make it happen. Little did he realize, however, that the events set into motion by Liam's death would unleash consequences far greater than anyone could have imagined. The Vorthok had ruled by fear for centuries, but now they were about to learn that fear could cut both ways. And when it turned against them, it would bring hell upon their empire. The days following Liam's death were heavy with grief and anger. The humans in the camp moved like ghosts, their faces pale and hollow, weighed down by the memory of the boy's lifeless body lying in the dirt. Ethan couldn't shake the image. From his mind, every time he closed his eyes, he saw Liam's wide, frightened eyes staring up at Zorvak, pleading for mercy that never came. It gnawed at him, eating away at his resolve to stay quiet and survive. He had spent years keeping his head down, doing what was necessary to endure the Vorthok's cruelty. But now, something inside him had shifted. Claire noticed the change in her husband almost immediately. Ethan was quieter than usual, his jaw clenched tight as if holding back words too dangerous to speak aloud. When she asked him about it, he simply shook his head and told her he needed time to think. But Claire knew better. She had seen that look in his eyes before, the same one he got when they first arrived on Krylos, and realized how hopeless their situation truly was. Back then, she had managed to talk him out of reckless ideas, reminding him that staying alive was their only priority. This time, however, she wasn't so sure she could convince him. One evening, after another long day in the mines, Ethan sat on the edge of their cot, staring at the cracked wall. His hands were calloused and streaked with dirt, but he barely noticed. Claire approached him cautiously, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Ethan," she said softly, "you're scaring me." He turned to look at her, his brown eyes filled with pain and determination. "I can't keep pretending everything is fine," he said. "Liam was just a kid, a child, and they killed him like he was nothing, like we're nothing."
"No,"
Claire replied, her voice trembling. "But we can't fight them." "You know what will happen if we try? They'll kill us all," maybe Ethan admitted. "But maybe not. What if we could do something? Something to make them pay for what they've done?" Claire sighed, sitting beside him. "You're talking about rebellion. Do you have any idea how dangerous that is?" "If they find out, they won't," Ethan interrupted. "Not if we're careful. I've been thinking about this for days. There are others who feel the same way I do. We're not alone, Claire. Maybe it's time we stood up for ourselves." Claire wanted to argue, to remind him of all the reasons why fighting back was impossible. But deep down, she understood why he felt the way he did. The Vorthok had taken everything from them, their freedom, their dignity, their humanity, and now they had taken Liam's life. She couldn't blame Ethan for wanting to fight back, but still the thought of losing him terrified her. Over the next few days, Ethan began reaching out to others in the camp. He started with Marcus, the former soldier whose strength and experience made him a natural leader. Marcus had lost count of how many times he had considered trying to escape or fight back, but he always dismissed the idea as suicidal. When Ethan approached him, however, something changed. For the first time in years, Marcus felt a flicker of hope. "You really think we can do this?" Marcus asked, his voice low to avoid being overheard. "I don't know," Ethan admitted, "but I'm tired of living like this." "Aren't you?" Marcus nodded slowly. "Count me in." With Marcus on board, Ethan turned his attention to Rachel, the medic who had quietly tended to the sick and injured in the camp. Rachel was small and unassuming, with short blonde hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. She had survived the loss of her family by focusing on helping others, but Ethan could see the anger simmering beneath her calm exterior. "I need your help," Ethan told her one evening, pulling her aside after dinner. Rachel crossed her arms, studying him carefully. "What kind of help?" "We're planning something," Ethan explained. "Something big. We'll need people we can trust. People who know how to take care of others if things go wrong." Rachel hesitated, her gaze dropping to the ground. She had spent years avoiding trouble, knowing that drawing attention to herself would only lead to more suffering. But the memory of Liam's death lingered in her mind, haunting her dreams. Finally, she looked up at Ethan and nodded. "Okay," she said, "I'm in." As word spread quietly through the camp, more people began joining Ethan's cause. There was Sarah, a timid woman whose brother had been killed in the mines. Daniel, a young man with a knack for mechanics. And even a few older miners who had given up hope of ever seeing freedom again. Each person brought something valuable to the group, whether it was skills, knowledge, sheer determination. Their meetings took place in secret, hidden in the shadows of the camp or deep within the tunnels of the mine. They spoke in hushed tones, careful not to attract the attention of the Vorthok overseers. At first, their plans were vague small acts of defiance, designed to disrupt the Vorthok's operations without risking too much. But as their numbers grew, so did their ambitions. One night, while exploring an abandoned section of the mine, Ethan discovered something that changed everything. Hidden beneath layers of rock and debris was a network of old tunnels that stretched far beyond the boundaries of the camp. These tunnels appeared to have been used by humans long before the Vorthok arrived, possibly as escape routes during earlier conflicts. To Ethan, they represented something more, a chance to strike back. This could be our way out, Ethan told the group during their next meeting, or at least our way in. In where? Marcus asked. The fortress, Ethan replied. Zorvak's stronghold. If we can get close enough, we might be able to sabotage their operations. Maybe even take out some of their leaders. The idea was bold, perhaps even foolish, but it ignited a spark of excitement among the group. For the first time in years, they dared to dream of a future free from the Vorthok's tyranny. Despite their growing optimism, challenges remained. The tunnels were unstable, their walls crumbling in places and littered with debris. Negating them would require skill and caution, and there was no guarantee they would lead anywhere useful. Worse still, the Vorthok had begun to notice the subtle signs of unrest in the camp. Patrols became more frequent, and punishments grew harsher. One miner was executed for allegedly stealing tools, though everyone knew it was just a pretext to instill fear. Tensions within the group also began to rise. Some members pushed for immediate action, arguing that waiting only gave the Vorthok more time to crush them. Others urged patience, warning that rushing into battle would doom them all. Ethan found himself caught in the middle, struggling to keep everyone united. It's not just about us, he reminded them during one particularly heated argument. It's about everyone. It's about Liam, about every human who suffered because of them. If we fail, we don't just lose our lives, we lose the chance to make a difference. His words silenced the room, reminding everyone of why they had joined the cause in the first place. Slowly, the group began to refocus, channeling their anger and frustration into preparation. They practiced moving silently through the tunnels. Learning how to navigate the treacherous terrain, they gathered whatever weapons they could find, broken tools, shards of metal, anything that could be used to defend themselves. And they waited for the right moment to strike. Meanwhile, Claire watched from the sidelines, torn between pride and fear. She admired Ethan's courage and determination, but she couldn't ignore the risks they were taking. Every night, she prayed for his safety, knowing that the odds were stacked against them. Still, she refused to stand in his way. If anyone could lead them to freedom, it was Ethan. One evening, as they sat together in their quarters, Claire reached out and took Ethan's hand. Promise me something, she said. What? Ethan asked, turning to look at her. Promise me you'll come back, Claire whispered. No matter what happens, promise me you'll come back to me. Ethan squeezed her hand tightly, his heart aching at the vulnerability in her voice. I promise, he said. We'll get through this together. But even as he spoke the words, he couldn't shake the feeling that the road ahead would be far more dangerous than any of them could imagine. The Vorthok ruled by fear, and they had grown complacent in their dominance. But now, that fear was beginning to turn against them. And when it did, it would unleash consequences none of them were prepared for. The tunnels beneath the mines were dark and suffocating, their air thick with the smell of damp earth and decay. Ethan moved cautiously, his boots crunching softly against loose gravel as he led the small group deeper into the labyrinth. The beam of his makeshift lantern, a piece of cloth soaked in oil wrapped around a stick, flickered weakly, casting eerie shadows on the jagged walls. Behind him, Marcus carried a crowbar, its heavy weight balanced across his shoulder. Rachel followed close behind, her medical bag slung over one arm, while Daniel brought up the rear, clutching a sharpened piece of metal like it was a weapon. They had been exploring the tunnels for hours, mapping out potential routes that could lead them closer to the Vorthok stronghold. Wasn't easy work. The passages twisted unpredictably, branching off in directions that seemed designed to confuse anyone who dared enter. In some places, the ceiling sagged dangerously low, forcing them to crawl on hands and knees. Other sections were flooded, with ankle-deep water, making every step slippery and uncertain. But despite the challenges, Ethan remained focused. He knew these tunnels were their best chance at striking back against the Vorthok, and he wasn't about to let fear stop him. You sure this is going to work? Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of dripping water. She walked beside Rachel, her arms crossed tightly over her chest as if trying to shield herself from the cold. Her face was pale, her eyes darting nervously toward every shadow. It has to, Ethan replied without looking back. If we don't try, nothing will ever change. Sarah didn't respond, but the tension in her shoulders told him she wasn't convinced. None of them were entirely sure this plan would succeed. They were miners, medics, and mechanics, not soldiers. Most of them had never held a weapon before, let alone fought against creatures as powerful and ruthless as the Vorthok. But desperation had a way of pushing people beyond their limits, and Ethan's quiet determination inspired them to keep going. After what felt like an eternity, they reached a narrow opening in the tunnel wall. Ethan paused, holding up a hand to signal the others to stop. He crouched down, examining the gap carefully. It was just wide enough for a person to squeeze through, but the jagged edges of rock suggested it hadn't been used in years. Still, something about it caught his attention. Beyond the opening, he could hear the faint hum of machinery, a sound he recognized all too well from the mines above. This might be it, Ethan said, turning to the group. If we can get through here, we might find a way into their operations. Stepped forward, inspecting the opening. Oh. It's risky, he muttered, but I think we can make it. One by one, they crawled through the gap, careful not to disturb the loose rocks around them. On the other side, the tunnel widened slightly, revealing a series of pipes and cables running along the walls. The hum of machinery grew louder, echoing. Through the space like a heartbeat, Ethan's pulse quickened. This was the first real sign that they were getting close to the Vorthok systems. Over the next few days, the group worked tirelessly to prepare for their attack. They mapped out the layout of the underground network, identifying key points where they could sabotage the Vorthok's equipment. Daniel, with his mechanical expertise, devised a plan to disable one of the mining machines, a massive drill that processed the rare minerals extracted from the ground. By targeting the machine, they hoped to disrupt the flow of resources and send a message to the Vorthok that humanity was no longer willing to submit quietly. But sabotage wasn't the only goal. Ethan also wanted to gather intelligence. If they could learn more about the Vorthok's operations, they might uncover weaknesses they could exploit in future attacks. To do that, they needed someone brave enough to venture closer to the surface, where the risk of being discovered was much higher. I'll go. Marcus volunteered during one of their meetings. I've got the most experience with combat. If anything goes wrong, I can handle myself. Ethan hesitated. He trusted Marcus, but sending him into such dangerous territory felt like gambling with his life. Are you sure? He asked finally. Marcus nodded firmly. Someone has to do it. And if we're serious about taking them down, we need information. Reluctantly, Ethan agreed. The following night, Marcus slipped away from the group, disappearing into the shadows of the tunnels. For hours, the rest of them waited anxiously, listening for any sign of trouble. When Marcus finally returned, his face was grim. They've doubled the patrols, he reported. Zorvac must have heard rumors about unrest in the camp. He's cracking down hard. Ethan clenched his fists, frustration boiling inside him. Then we move faster, he said. We can't wait for them to figure out what we're doing. We hit them tonight. That evening, the group gathered in the deepest part of the tunnels, their faces illuminated by the dim glow of their lanterns. Each person carried whatever tools or weapons they could scavenge, their expressions a mix of fear and resolve. Ethan stood in front of them, his voice steady, despite the storm of emotions raging within him. This is it, he said. Tonight we show the Vorthok that we're not afraid anymore, and we strike at their heart, and we do it together, no matter what happens. Remember why we're doing this for Liam, for everyone they've hurt, and for the future of our people. The others nodded silently, their eyes reflecting both determination and dread. Without another word, they set off into the darkness, moving swiftly through the tunnels toward their target. When they reached the mining machine, Daniel went to work immediately. His hands moved with practiced precision as he dismantled parts of the drill, rigging it to collapse under its own weight. The others kept watch, their ears straining for any sound of approaching Vorthok guards. Time seemed to stretch endlessly, each second heavier than the last. Finally, Daniel gave a sharp nod. It's ready, he whispered. Of here, as they retreated back into the tunnels, The ground shook violently behind them. A deafening roar filled the air as the drill collapsed, sending clouds of dust billowing through the mine. Alarms blared in the distance, and the unmistakable sound of Vorthok's screeches echoed through the tunnels. "We did it," Sarah breathed, her voice trembling with disbelief. But Ethan knew this was only the beginning. The sabotage had succeeded, but it would draw the Vorthok's full attention. From now on, there would be no turning back. Back in the camp, chaos erupted as news of the attack spread. The Vorthok were furious, their once unshakable confidence shaken by the sudden act of rebellion. Zorvak himself descended into the mines, his glowing green eyes scanning the humans with undisguised rage. Guards rounded up suspected insurgents, dragging them away for interrogation. Some were executed on the spot, their bodies left as warnings. 2 others, among those captured, was Rachel. She had stayed behind in the tunnels to tend to a miner injured during the escape, unaware that the Vorthok were already searching for survivors. When they found her, she didn't resist. Instead, she stared at them defiantly, refusing to betray her comrades even as they dragged her. To the center of the camp, Ethan watched helplessly from the shadows as Rachel was brought before Zorvak. Her calm demeanor infuriated the Vorthok leader, who demanded answers she refused to give. Torture followed, but Rachel endured it in silence, buying precious time for the others too, regrouped her. Sacrifice weighed heavily on Ethan. He had always known that fighting back would come at a cost, but seeing someone he cared about suffer because of his choices tore at him. Still, he couldn't afford to dwell on guilt. Rachel had given them a chance to survive, and he owed it to her to make the most of it. In the days that followed, the resistance grew stronger. Word of the sabotage spread quickly, inspiring others to join the cause. New recruits poured into the tunnels, bringing fresh ideas and renewed hope. Among them was a young man named Kyle, whose family had been killed in the initial Vorthok invasion. His anger burned fiercely, fueling his determination to fight back. But tensions within the group also began to rise. So many new members. Came differing opinions on how to proceed. Some argued for immediate all-out war, while others advocated for smaller, calculated strikes. Ethan struggled to keep everyone united, knowing that division could doom them all. "We can't afford to fall apart," he told the group during one particularly heated meeting. "We're stronger together. If we lose sight of that, we lose everything." His words resonated with some, but not everyone was convinced. Sarah, in particular, grew increasingly vocal about her desire for revenge. "We should hit them where it hurts," she insisted.
Oh.
"Take out their leaders. Make them pay for what they've done." Ethan understood her pain, but he also knew that rash decisions could lead to disaster. "We'll get our chance," he said firmly, "but not yet. First, we need to weaken them. Then, when the time is right, we'll strike." Though reluctant, the group eventually agreed to follow his lead. They continued planning, gathering supplies, and preparing for their next move. Tote. But as they worked, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that the Vorthok were watching them, waiting for the perfect moment to strike back. Little did he realize, however, that the events set into motion by their sabotage were already spiraling out of control. The Vorthok's paranoia was growing, and their grip on Krylos was beginning to falter. Asterisk. The days following the sabotage were tense and chaotic. The Vorthok's response was swift and brutal, their once calculated cruelty now laced with panic. Patrols swept through the mines and camps with relentless ferocity, dragging people from their quarters and interrogating them under the dim red glow of Krylos' skies. Zorvak himself prowled the grounds, his towering form casting long shadows that seemed to swallow entire groups of humans whole. His glowing green eyes scanned the faces of the enslaved, searching for signs of rebellion. But no matter how many people they questioned or punished, the Vorthok couldn't find the source of the attack. Ethan and the others watched it all unfold from the safety of the tunnels. They had retreated deeper underground after Rachel's capture, knowing that staying near the surface was too dangerous. Every day brought new reports of executions, beatings, and random acts of violence meant to terrify the human population into submission. Yet instead of quelling unrest, the Vorthok's actions only fueled the growing anger among the slaves. Whispers of defiance spread like wildfire, carried on the backs of those who dared to hope for freedom. But hope came at a cost. Sacrifice weighed heavily on Ethan, gnawing at him like a wound that refused to heal. He replayed her calm defiance in his mind over and over again, each memory sharpening his resolve, but also deepening his guilt. She had endured torture without breaking, buying time for the resistance to regroup. And yet, despite her bravery, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that he had failed her. He had promised himself that no one else would suffer because of his choices, but he knew that promise was hollow. War always demanded sacrifices, whether you wanted it to or not. Claire saw the toll it was taking on him. She tried to comfort him as best she could, reminding him that Rachel had made her choice willingly. She believed in what we're doing, Claire said one evening, her voice soft but firm. And so do I. You can't carry this burden alone, Ethan. We're all in this together. Her words helped, but only a little. Ethan knew she was right. They were fighting for something bigger than themselves. Still, the weight of leadership pressed down on him harder with each passing day. The group looked to him for guidance, trusting him to lead them toward victory. But leading wasn't easy when the path ahead was shrouded in uncertainty. As the resistance grew, so did the challenges within it. New recruits brought fresh energy and ideas, but they also introduced conflict. Some members pushed for immediate action, eager to strike back at the Vorthok while their morale was still high. Others argued for caution, warning that rushing into battle would only lead to disaster. Tensions flared during meetings, voices rising in heated arguments that sometimes bordered on shouting matches. One night, Sarah confronted Ethan directly. Her face was flushed with anger, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "We need to hit them harder," she insisted. "Every day we wait is another day they hurt more of us. We should go after Zorvak himself, take him out, and the rest will fall apart." Ethan shook his head, his jaw tight. "It's not that simple," he said. "Zorvak is protected at all times. Trying to get to him would be suicide." Sarah shot back. "But sitting around planning isn't going to change anything either. If we don't act soon, they'll crush us before we even have a chance." Her words struck a nerve, and for a moment, Ethan felt the same frustration bubbling inside him. He wanted to lash out, to tell her that he understood the stakes better than anyone. But instead, he took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. "I know you're angry," he said finally. "We all are. But if we rush in without thinking, we'll lose everything. We need to weaken them first. Then, when the time is right, we'll strike." Sarah didn't look convinced, but she nodded reluctantly and stepped back. The argument ended there, but the tension lingered, hanging in the air like smoke. Ethan knew he couldn't afford to let disagreements divide them not, when unity was their greatest strength. He called the group together later that night, determined to remind them of why they were fighting. "We've come too far to turn back now," he said, his voice steady, despite the storm of emotion swirling inside him. "This isn't just about revenge. It's about creating a future where no child has to grow up in fear, where no one has to die because they were hungry or tired or scared. That's what we're fighting for. But if we let anger cloud our judgment, we'll lose sight of that, and then we'll lose everything." His words resonated with some, calming the simmering tensions. Others remained skeptical, but for now, they agreed to follow his lead. Slowly, the group refocused, channeling their anger into preparation. They practiced moving silently through the tunnels, learning how to avoid detection. They gathered supplies and weapons, scavenging whatever they could find. And they waited for the right moment to strike again. Meanwhile, the Vorthek's paranoia reached new heights. Zorvak became increasingly erratic, snapping at his subordinates and accusing them of betrayal. Rumors of dissent within their own ranks began to circulate, further destabilizing their command structure. Guards turned on each other, driven by suspicion and fear. The humans noticed these cracks in the Vorthak's armor, and it gave them hope. For the first time in years, they dared to believe that the monsters who had ruled them might actually be vulnerable. Ethan saw an opportunity. If the Vorthok were already turning against each other, perhaps they could exploit that division. He proposed a plan to sow discord among the enemy, using misinformation to deepen their mistrust. It was risky. Any misstep could expose the resistance. But the potential rewards were worth the gamble. Daniel volunteered to help, using scraps. Of metal and wiring, he fashioned a crude device designed to mimic the sound of human voices. When activated, it would broadcast faint whispers through the tunnels. It's just loud enough to draw attention, but not clear enough to understand. The goal was to make the Vorthok think there were rebels hiding nearby, fueling their paranoia and keeping them distracted. It won't hold them off forever, Daniel admitted as he showed the device to Ethan. But it might buy us some time. It's exactly what we need, Ethan replied, clapping him on the shoulder. Good work. That night, the group set the device in place, positioning it near one of the main patrol routes. Within hours, the effect was noticeable. Vorthok guards began sweeping the area, their movements frantic and uncoordinated. Arguments broke out among them, their guttural clicks and hisses echoing through the tunnels. One guard accused another of negligence, while a third insisted they had been misled. By morning, 2 of them lay dead, victims of their own infighting. The humans celebrated quietly, their spirits lifted by the small victory. But Ethan knew better than to let success go to their heads. This was just the beginning. To truly weaken the Vorthok, they needed to strike at the heart of their operations, the fortress perched atop the mountain. Planning the assault on the fortress was no easy task. The stronghold loomed over the landscape like a dark sentinel, its walls reinforced with materials stronger than anything the humans had access to. Automated defenses patrolled the perimeter, their mechanical limbs glinting in the dim light. Inside, Zorvac coordinated his forces from a central control hub, a massive chamber filled with screens and consoles that allowed him to monitor every aspect of his empire. Getting inside would require precision, timing, and a lot of luck. But Ethan was determined to make it happen. He spent hours poring over the maps Marcus had drawn during his earlier reconnaissance mission, memorizing every detail of the fortress's layout. He assigned roles to each member of the team based on their strengths. Marcus would handle security breaches, Daniel would disable automated systems, and Rachel, if she survived, would provide medical support. Claire insisted on joining the mission, arguing that her knowledge of the fortress's ventilation system made her invaluable. "You're not coming," Ethan told her firmly. "It's too dangerous. And letting you go alone isn't." Claire countered, her voice sharp. "I'm not staying behind while you risk your life. We're in this together, remember?" Ethan opened his mouth to argue, but stopped himself. He knew there was no changing her mind once it was made up. Reluctantly, he agreed to let her join the team, though the decision left a knot of worry in his stomach. The night before the mission, the group gathered in the tunnels for one final meeting. Each person checked their equipment, ensuring everything was ready for the task ahead. The air was thick with anticipation, the kind of quiet intensity that comes before a storm. Ethan stood in front of them, his lantern casting flickering shadows across their faces. "This is it," he said, his voice low but steady. "Tomorrow, we take the fight to them, no matter what happens. Remember why we're doing this. It's for Liam, for Rachel, for everyone they've taken from us, for everyone who deserves a better future." The others nodded, their eyes reflecting both determination and fear. Without another word, they extinguished their lanterns and retreated into the darkness, preparing for the battle that awaited them. As Ethan lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling of the tunnel, he couldn't help but wonder if they were making the right choice. The odds were stacked against them, and failure would mean certain death. But even as doubt crept into his mind, he reminded himself of one thing: they had nothing left to lose. And sometimes that was enough. The journey to the Vorthok fortress was long and treacherous. The resistance moved under the cover of darkness, their footsteps muffled by the thick ash that blanketed Krylus's barren landscape. Ethan led the way, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. Behind him, Marcus carried a crowbar slung over his shoulder, while Daniel clutched a small toolkit filled with improvised gadgets. Claire stayed close to Ethan, her face pale but resolute as she adjusted the straps of the backpack holding their supplies. Sarah brought up the rear, her sharp gaze darting nervously toward every shadow. The fortress loomed ahead, its jagged silhouette cutting against the dim red sky like a monstrous beast. Automated drones circled its perimeter, their mechanical limbs glinting faintly in the low light. The sight sent a chill through the group, but they pressed on, knowing there was no turning back now. Every step forward felt heavier than the last, weighed down by the knowledge that failure meant not just their deaths, but the end of humanity's fragile hope for freedom. As they approached the base of the mountain, Ethan signaled for the group to stop. He crouched low, studying the terrain carefully. The fortress was perched high above them, accessible only by a narrow path carved into the mountainside. Guards patrolled the route, their glowing green eyes scanning the area constantly. Getting past them would require precision and a lot of luck. "We'll use the lower tunnel," Ethan whispered, pointing to a dark opening, half hidden by rocks and debris. "It leads directly into the fortress. If we can make it inside without being seen, we'll have a chance." Marcus nodded, his expression grim. "Let's move." The tunnel was even more dangerous than the ones beneath the mines. Its walls were slick with moisture, and the air was cold enough to make their breath visible in the dim light of their lanterns. The floor sloped upward sharply, forcing them to climb at awkward angles. Loose stones shifted beneath their feet, threatening to send them tumbling backward at any moment. But despite the challenges, they pushed forward, driven by the urgency of their mission. At one point, Sarah slipped, her boot sliding on a patch of wet rock. She let out a soft gasp, grabbing onto Daniel's arm to steady herself. Everyone froze, their hearts pounding as they waited for the sound of approaching guards or drones. But the silence held, broken only by the distant hum of machinery echoing through the tunnel. After a tense moment, Ethan motioned for them to keep moving. When they finally reached the end of the tunnel, they found themselves in a maintenance corridor deep within the fortress. The walls here were lined with pipes and wires, and the air smelled faintly of oil and metal. Ethan pulled out the map Marcus had drawn earlier, studying it carefully before nodding toward a set of stairs leading upward. "This way," he said quietly. "We need to reach the central control hub." The climb was grueling, each step echoing loudly in the confined space. They moved as quietly as possible, their movements deliberate and cautious. At one point, they encountered a pair of Vorthok guards stationed near a security checkpoint. Marcus signaled for the group to stay back while he crept forward, his crowbar gripped tightly in his hands. With a swift, silent motion, he knocked both guards unconscious, dragging their bodies into a nearby alcove to hide them from view. "Good work," Ethan whispered as they hurried past the checkpoint. But the closer they got to the control hub, the more heavily guarded the fortress became. Drones zipped through the corridors, their sensors scanning for intruders. Guards stood at every corner, their claws clicking against the metal floors. The group was forced to take detours, weaving through labyrinthine passages in an effort to avoid detection. Each wrong turn cost them precious time, and the tension among them grew palpable. Finally, they reached the entrance to the control hub, a massive steel door reinforced with layers of alien alloy. Daniel knelt in front of it, examining the locking mechanism closely. His fingers worked quickly, prying open panels and rerouting wires with practiced precision. Sweat dripped from his brow as he concentrated, the weight of their mission pressing down on him. "I've almost got it," he muttered, his voice barely audible. Behind him, Claire kept watch, her hand resting on a shard of sharpened metal. She had scavenged from the tunnels. Her eyes darted nervously toward the corridor, searching for any sign of danger. When she heard the faint click of boots approaching, her heart skipped a beat. "They're coming," she hissed. Ethan spun around, his pulse racing. He could see the glow of Vorthok eyes reflecting off the walls as a patrol rounded the corner. There was no time to run. They were trapped. "Daniel, hurry," Ethan urged. With a final twist of his screwdriver, Daniel triggered the lock. The door hissed open, revealing the vast chamber beyond. Inside, rows of consoles blinked with lights, their screens displaying complex data streams. At the center of the room stood Zorvak, his towering form surrounded by holographic displays showing the status of his empire. "Go," Ethan shouted, pushing the others inside. As the group slipped into the control hub, the Vorthok patrol burst into the corridor behind them. Alarms blared instantly, filling the air with a deafening wail. Zorvak turned toward the commotion, his glowing eyes narrowing as he spotted the intruders. Intruders. He screeched, raising his claws. Eliminate them. Chaos erupted. Marcus charged forward, swinging his crowbar with all his strength. He struck the first drone square in its sensor array, sending it crashing to the ground in a shower of sparks. Sarah followed close behind, wielding her makeshift weapon with surprising ferocity. Together, they managed to hold off the initial wave of attackers. Buying time for Ethan and the others to plant explosives around the room, Claire worked alongside Daniel, setting charges on key pieces of equipment. Her hands trembled as she attached detonators to the consoles, but she refused to let fear slow her down. "Almost done," she called out, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. Meanwhile, Ethan faced off against Zorvak. The Vorthok leader was faster and stronger than anything Ethan had ever fought before, his claws slicing through the air with deadly precision. Ethan dodged and ducked, barely avoiding the blows that came inches from splitting him in two. Swung a heavy wrench he had picked up during the climb, striking Zorvak's armored exoskeleton with little effect. "You cannot win." Zorvak growled, his voice dripping with contempt. "You are nothing but insects to me." Ethan gritted his teeth, refusing to give up. He feinted left, drawing Zorvak's attention, then lunged forward, driving the wrench into a crack in the creature's armor. Zorvak roared in pain, stumbling backward as green blood oozed from the wound. Seizing the opportunity, Ethan grabbed a loose cable and wrapped it around Zorvak's neck. Pulling with all his might, the battle raged on, the room filling with smoke, and the acrid smell of burning metal. One by one, the group completed their tasks, planting explosives throughout the control hub. When the last charge was set, Ethan shouted, "Fall back." They retreated toward the exit, dodging falling debris as explosions rocked the fortress. Behind them, Zorvak struggled to free himself from the cable, his rage boiling over as the room began to collapse around him. Outside, the group emerged into the pre-dawn light, their bodies battered and bruised but alive. As they watched, the fortress shuddered violently, its walls crumbling inward as secondary explosions tore through its structure. A deafening roar echoed across the landscape, signaling the end of Zorvak's reign. For a moment, there was silence. Then cheers erupted from the humans who had gathered at the base of the mountain, watching the destruction unfold. Tears streamed down Claire's face as she hugged Ethan tightly, her body shaking with relief and exhaustion. Around them, others embraced, laughing and crying in equal measure. But Ethan knew the fight wasn't truly over. The Vorthok still controlled much of Krylos, and their response to this attack would be swift and brutal. Still, for the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel a flicker of hope. They had struck a blow against their oppressors, a blow that proved humanity was no longer willing to live in fear. As the sun rose over the horizon, casting a faint orange glow across the ash-covered plains, Ethan looked out at the crowd of survivors. Their faces were weary, but determined, their spirits lifted by the knowledge that change was possible. And though the road ahead would be long and difficult, Ethan vowed to lead them forward to build a future where no child would ever suffer as Liam had. The destruction of the fortress sent shockwaves through Krylos, both literally and figuratively. The ground trembled as the stronghold collapsed into itself, sending plumes of smoke and ash billowing into the sky. For miles around, the sound of explosions echoed like thunder, a grim reminder of the power humanity had unleashed against their oppressors. But amidst the chaos, there was also a sense of triumph, a fragile, flickering hope that had been absent for far too long. Ethan stood at the edge of the mountain, his body aching from the battle, but his mind racing with thoughts of what came. Next, behind him, the survivors gathered in small groups, tending to their wounds and celebrating quietly. Some hugged each other tightly, tears streaming down their faces as they processed the magnitude of what they had achieved. Sat in silence, staring at the ruins of the fortress with expressions of disbelief. They had done it, they had struck back against the Vorthok, proving that resistance was not only possible but effective, but Ethan knew better than to let the momentary victory cloud his judgment. The fall of the fortress was a significant blow. To the Vorthok, but it wasn't enough to dismantle their entire empire. Zorvak might have been dead, but the Vorthok were still out there, scattered across Krylos and beyond. And they wouldn't take this defeat lying down. They'll come for us, Ethan said aloud, though no one was close enough to hear him. His voice was low, almost drowned out by the distant crackle of flames consuming the remains of the fortress. This isn't over. Claire approached him then, her steps slow and deliberate. Her face was streaked with dirt and soot, but her eyes shone with determination. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. She placed a hand on his shoulder, squeezing gently. Da-da-da-da-da-da, Ethan, she said softly. We all did. No matter what happens next, we've shown them that we're not afraid anymore. Ethan turned to look at her, his lips curling into a faint smile despite the weight of everything ahead. It's just the beginning, he replied. We've hurt them, but they'll retaliate. We need to be ready. In the days that followed, the humans began to regroup and rebuild. The destruction of the fortress had sparked something in the collective resolve to reclaim their world. Survivors from nearby camps poured into the area, drawn by news of the rebellion's success. Many brought supplies, tools, or weapons scavenged from the mines. Others offered their skills, whether it was cooking, healing, or crafting makeshift defenses. Slowly but surely, the remnants of humanity began to organize themselves. Forming a community united by a shared purpose, Ethan and the others worked tirelessly to prepare for the inevitable counterattack. They fortified their position, using debris from the destroyed fortress to construct barricades and shelters. Daniel and Marcus led teams in repairing damaged equipment, turning discarded scraps into functional tools and weapons. Rachel, who had miraculously survived her captivity and rejoined the group after escaping during the confusion, tended to the injured and taught others basic medical techniques. Even Sarah found her place, helping coordinate patrols and keep morale high among the newcomers. Despite their progress, tensions lingered. Supplies were scarce, and the constant threat of retaliation weighed heavily on everyone's minds. Arguments broke out occasionally, usually over resource distribution or leadership decisions. But Ethan handled these conflicts with patience, reminding the group of their shared goal and the sacrifices that had been made to get them this far. We're stronger together, he told them during one particularly heated disagreement. If we start turning on each other now, we've already lost. His words resonated with most, easing the friction just enough to keep things moving forward. Still, Ethan couldn't ignore the growing unease in his gut. Weren't known for mercy, and he knew their response would be brutal when it came. It arrived sooner than anyone expected. Just 3 days after the destruction of the fortress, a fleet of Vorthok ships descended upon the survivors' camp. Their sleek, insectoid designs glinted menacingly in the dim light of Krylos's red skies as they hovered overhead, casting long shadows across the landscape. From the ships emerged dozens of Vorthok soldiers, their claws clicking against the rocky ground as they advanced in perfect formation. The humans scrambled to defend themselves, rushing to man the barricades and arm themselves with whatever weapons they had. Ethan took charge immediately, shouting orders and directing people to strategic positions. Marcus led a team to hold the front line, while Daniel worked frantically to activate traps and improvised explosives hidden throughout the camp. Claire stayed by Ethan's side, her sharp eyes scanning the battlefield for weaknesses in the enemy's approach. The battle was fierce and chaotic. The Vorthok attacked with relentless precision, their superior strength and numbers overwhelming. The human defenders. Explosions rocked the ground as grenades detonated, sending shards of metal flying in every direction. Gunfire erupted sporadically, though many of the humans relied on melee weapons crafted from mine tools and scrap metal. Blood stained the earth. Both human and Vorthokast, the two sides clashed in a desperate struggle for survival. Ethan fought alongside his comrades, wielding a sharpened piece of rebar with deadly efficiency. He moved with a focus born of desperation, striking down any Vorthok soldier who dared to cross his path. Each blow fueled by anger for Liam, for Rachel's suffering, for every life lost under the Vorthok's tyranny. Yet even as he fought, he noticed something surprising. The humans weren't backing down. Despite being outnumbered and outgunned, they stood their ground, refusing to yield an inch. This is our home, Someone shouted a rallying cry that spread quickly through the ranks. "We won't let them take it from us." The words ignited a fire within the survivors, driving them to fight harder than ever before. Slowly but surely, they began to push back against the Vorthok assault. Traps detonated, taking out entire squads of soldiers. Guerrilla tactics allowed smaller groups to ambush and flank the invaders, exploiting their rigid formations. When the tide seemed about to turn, reinforcements arrived. Humans from neighboring camps who had heard of the rebellion and come to join the fight. By the time the dust settled, the Vorthok forces lay defeated, their ships retreating into the sky. With screeches of frustration, the humans cheered, their voices hoarse but triumphant as they surveyed the battlefield. Bodies littered the ground, a grim testament to the cost of their victory. But for the first time in generations, they felt a sense of control over their own fate. Ethan stood amidst the wreckage, his chest heaving as he caught his breath. Around him, the survivors embraced, cried, and laughed, all emotions mingling in the aftermath of such a monumental struggle. Claire approached him, her face streaked with tears but her expression radiant. "We did it," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "We actually did it." Ethan nodded, pulling her into a tight hug. "Not completely," he admitted. "There are still more of them out there. This war isn't over yet." "But we've taken the first step," Claire replied firmly, "and we'll keep fighting until we've taken back everything they stole from us." In the weeks and months that followed, the humans continued to rebuild and strengthen their position. They established new settlements, fortified old ones, and trained recruits in preparation for future battles. Word of their rebellion spread across Krylos, inspiring others to rise up against the Vorthok. The once uncheckable empire began to crumble, its grip on the planet weakening with each passing day. Ethan became a symbol of hope for the resistance. A quiet but determined leader who inspired others to believe in a better future. He worked tirelessly to ensure that the lessons of the past were never forgotten, dedicating memorials to those who had sacrificed their lives, including Liam, whose memory served as a reminder of why they fought. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan stood atop a hill overlooking the largest settlement. Fires burned brightly in the distance, casting warm light across the land. Children played in the streets, their laughter echoing through the air, a sound that had been absent for far too long. Claire joined him, leaning her head on his shoulder as they watched the scene unfold. "It's not perfect," Ethan said softly, "but it's a start." "It's more than we had before," Claire replied, smiling. "And it's because of you." Ethan shook his head. "Not me. All of us. Together." As they stood there, hand in hand, Ethan allowed himself a moment of peace. The road ahead would still be difficult, filled with challenges and sacrifices yet unknown. But for now, they had proven that fear could be overcome, that even the most powerful tyrants could be brought down by the courage and unity of those they sought to oppress. And in that moment, Ethan knew they had truly begun to build a future worth fighting for.